Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this session from Getting on Board and the Association of Chairs. This afternoon, we're talking about co-chairing, which I think is going to be a really, really interesting session. I'm Penny from Getting on Board, and the session is going to be hosted and chaired by Dan Bishop, who's from the Association of Chairs. And we've got three panelists who are all co-chairs to talk to us about their own experiences as co-chairs. So first of all, a bit of housekeeping from me. So you will have seen as you've come in that the session is being recorded. You will get access to that recording via a Zoom link. That recording will include the chat. So just be aware of that if you're putting questions or making comments in the chat. If you'd like to pose a question and you want to be anonymous, please feel free to send it directly to me in the chat. The session will also go onto YouTube eventually. That recording won't include the chat. You've been muted on the way into the call. Please stay muted unless Dan comes to you for a question. That just helps keep everything nice and clear. Closed captions are available. They've been enabled at our end. So if you'd like subtitles, you need to click the CC or closed caption button on your device. Please do use the chat. Please ask questions. Please share experiences. If we have any other co-chairs on the call, we particularly love to hear from you. And then finally, a giant thank you to our 5 sponsors tonight: Charisma, Starfish, TPP, Peridot and Diversifying Group. They're all agencies which support trustee recruitment. And thanks to them, we can offer you this session free of charge, and indeed a whole strand of our trustee learning programme free of charge. So thank you, and over to Dan.
Great, thank you so much, Penny. It's lovely to be here. Association of Chairs and Getting on Board. We've got a really close and really good working relationship. We're always delighted to partner on events, and this evening is no exception. As Penny mentioned, my name is Dan Bishop, and I'm Head of Operations and Services at Association of Chairs, which, if you're not aware, is a network organisation for those in a chairing role in the charity sector. Last night, actually, we celebrated our 10th anniversary, and we've currently got about 1,000 members, and it's good to see some of them on the call this evening. And so to this evening's topic, we know that we need to diversify the group of people fulfilling leadership roles in our sector. And we also know that chairing roles can take a long time and lots of energy, and are too much of a commitment for some people to do alone. So can co-chairing help with this? Well, it's certainly an option. We hear that 2 heads can be better than 1. We often hear it's a really lonely role, and we're seeing a rise in flexible working across the society. But some people might say actually it's not just half the work, and that can be quite problematic. Might there also be a danger of too many cooks spoiling the broth? And what about unclear reporting lines? So this is a really key conversation that Penny and I have spoken about for a while, and we've both been really looking forward to. Thank you for joining us in it. By doing so, that you're demonstrating a commitment to sort of change up the status quo, to hopefully get more people involved in the sector and to learn from others. And I'm a co-treasurer myself, so I'm looking forward to picking up some tips too. But thankfully, you haven't come to hear from me all night, so I'm delighted to be joined by our 3 panellists, Manda, Julie and Grant. And in a second, I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves and tell us how they got into co-chairing. And then I'm going to ask some more questions, which hopefully you'll find useful. And then we're going to open up so that you can ask your questions along the way as well. So as Penny mentioned, please do put your questions in the chat as we go through. You can ask on behalf of a friend if you'd like to. You can ask Penny anonymously using the direct chat function if you'd like to. We'll pick out as many as we can as we go through for us to discuss. We might not all agree on everything, but hopefully the opinions that we can give and our experiences will be useful to you. And as Penny said, we'd like to hear yours as well. So we want this to be an interactive session. Please do get involved in that respect. As I mentioned, you haven't come to hear from me, so I'm going to hand over to our panelists to introduce themselves, and I'm going to start with Julie.
Afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Dan. Hi, I'm Julie Nerney. So a bit about me and how I got into co-chairing. So quite an eclectic career. First 14 years of my life, I was a serial entrepreneur, started, ran and sold 14 businesses in the UK and Europe. And I spent the last 20 years leading organisations through change. So either from a CEO, COO or transformation director's role. Everything from organisational turnaround, taking new products to market, or just complex delivery, like delivering the transport operation for the Olympic Games. I'm a guest lecturer, public speaker. I've published a couple of books, but for the last 18 years, I've had a non-exec portfolio that's covered the public, private and third sectors. That spanned 8 non-exec roles, 4 trustee roles, 3 chairs positions, and lastly, a co-chair's position, and it's my first one. So currently I'm a non-executive director for the UK Supreme Court. I'm a trustee for safety qualification organisation NEBOSH, and I'm a co-chair for Getting on Board. And I became a co-chair because Grant suggested it to me, because Getting on Board were looking for a chair. He was keen, I was keen, neither of us had enough time to do it on our own, and so we applied jointly. So that's me, Dan.
Thanks, Julie. And that segues lovely into hearing from Grant. So over to you, Grant.
Hello, thanks, Dan. Hello, everybody. So Julie, yes, she's the experienced half of the co-chair partnership, and I'll explain why in a moment. That was the appeal. So my background is too many years in recruitment. Founded Peridot in 2009. Always worked with charities and non-profits. Loved the board work. Worked with boards for many years now in terms of recruitment. A bit of board development work, and Getting on Board is my fourth trusteeship. In fact, it was my third trusteeship, but I've had one come and go since I've been with Getting on Board. So I've got a few trusteeships, and when the previous chair stepped down, I didn't really think it was possible for me to put myself forward as much as I would have liked to. There were two reasons for that. One, I didn't have the time, as Julie said. And two, I wasn't quite sure I was ready. And so I wasn't convinced that I wanted to do it, but I met Julie one day. We've known each other for years, and I think that's an important point that we'll come back to during today. And she was talking to me about a gap in her portfolio, and the light bulbs went on. So I thought, what an amazing opportunity for me to maybe work with Julie, if she was up for it, learn from her in my first chair role, etc., etc. So it went from there. So that's how I come to be in the position of co-chairing, Getting on Board with Julie. But do love the charity sector, very much immersed in it, and all things boards and governance.
Brilliant, thanks, Grant. And Grant's written a brilliant blog on co-chairing. Obviously, I was completely prepared for this session early this afternoon, but just to check I put charity co-chair into Google, and Grant's blog was the first thing that came up. So just above one from AOC, actually. So I'm glad we're both in the top 10. So don't go away and read it now, because we've got lots of important things to talk about beforehand. But do go and read that. I think the link's in the chat, and we'll come around in the follow-up email as well. Amanda, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. I have got very little experience compared to the other two. I've been doing a lot of work in different corporates, and I have quite a mixed bag of career stuff in the background, but I joined the Hunger Project. I'm a co-chair on the Hunger Project UK, which is part of a global NGO. We are in 13 countries worldwide. And I started off as an investor, very passionate about the work we do. And I was asked to become a trustee about 5 or 6 years ago. That was my first trustee role. At the same time, I got involved in doing a master's in charity effectiveness at CAS. So I wanted to get the academic side of it as well, because I had imposter syndrome from the start. COVID didn't treat us very nicely, because all our fundraising was very much focused on events. And so because of that, we lost our team. We had to make a decision to let go of our team. And as a trustee board, we had to make some really difficult decisions about how to move forward with very little fundraising. So I, at the time in 2020, agreed to step up and become an acting CEO pro bono for the charity. And I did that for about 20 months. We got through that period relatively well. It was a very tough time. And at the end of that, we were able to take on a paid CEO in May 2022. And once that happened, the board asked if I would become chair, because our current chair had been in position for over 7 years, I think. She was very keen to step down. And having done the academic side of it, I absolutely knew the responsibilities of being a chair. And I, again, thought, I'm not quite sure that I have the ability to do the entire job. So I actually reached out to a very good friend and fellow investor of the Hunger Project, who's very, as Grant said, it's important that I knew her really well. And we have both taken on the co-chair role, and it's been a year and a half, and it's worked extremely well so far.
Great, thank you. It's great to have you all on the call, and as I say, looking forward to getting stuck into the conversation. You'll have to forgive me, I'm an ops director by trade, so I'm going to dive into the detail of my first question, but people are going to want to know how this stuff works. So Manda, I'm going to come to you first, but just talk me through some of the practicalities in terms of how you're sharing this stuff that perhaps traditionally and in the most organizations is done by one person, and not all of it perhaps might be easy to slice down the middle.
Well, I think you already hit on a lot of the pros and cons, Dan, already. You know, as a lone wolf, if you're a lone chair, it's quite a big responsibility. As a global organisation, we have to get involved with our partner countries, our global heads in the programme countries, and there's a huge amount of work involved. There's the governance side of things. There's then the relationship side of the chair CEO role, and then there's also the whole keeping the board together, having them aligned on strategy, mission, vision, and right down to the actual day-to-day mundane stuff. So I think for us, personally as board, it's worked brilliantly. Joanna Martin is an incredibly successful entrepreneur, and she runs a huge training and coaching business called One of Many, and she has amazing strengths that I've found useful to divide our roles during the time we've been doing this. And I think for us, the positives have been that we both know each other very well. We both trust each other immensely. We're very happy to, WhatsApp or call as and when needed. It's not a very formal situation, which in our view, it works for us. Because I think, if you have too many boundaries, it's very difficult to then keep it flexible. So we have a lot of flexibility, and we've understand each other's strengths. We understand, that I do spend a lot of the time on the global stuff. I spend a lot of the time on the governance. I understand the fundraising operations deeply because I was the CEO, so it helps. And I think Jo is brilliant with people management, with understanding leadership on a greater level. She chairs our meetings much better than I could do, and makes them interesting. But she also is a great person for me to be a sounding board for. And those things all add up to making a very effective relationship.
Thank you. That's really important, that sounding board piece, isn't it? We often hear that from vice chairs, but co-chairs do it in some ways better because there's that sort of parity between the two. Julie, how does it work with you and Grant?
So very similar to Mandy. So in my experience, the chair's got three things they need to do. They need to lead a team of people, which is the board. They need to be both a sounding board and the line manager of the chief exec. And they have their kind of up and out ambassadorial kind of relationship responsibilities. So when Grant and I first became co-chairs, we sat down and decided which one of those would be shared and which one of those we would do separately. And actually we share more than we do separately. So we alternate the chairing of board meetings, which is great. We have our regular catch-ups with our chief exec together. If we're recruiting new members of our team, our board team, we interview together because that's really important in terms of dynamics. So I think for me, it's about the value of having different experiences, different styles. We have different relationships with different members of the board. Grant was serving on the board for a lot longer than I was. I joined the board new as a co-chair. So there's some history where we've changed the board composition, where that's been advantageous as well. But I think just practically, it helps share the workload. Organisationally, I think we split ourselves across those three things. But I think personally, what I find most rewarding, having been a chair in lots of other organisations, is when you're the chair or the chief exec, it's incredibly lonely sometimes. People expect you to have all the answers, or the buck stops with you for your areas of responsibility. And I've absolutely loved having somebody else to talk to about that stuff. And commonly we agree, but sometimes we don't. We have fantastic conversations with Penny every fortnight where Penny will say, what do you think? And I'll say something and Grant will go, well, what about this? And I'll go, actually, that's a much better idea. And we build on that. And all great teams make better decisions when you have diversity of thought, right? So having two heads in the chair's role rather than one is hugely valuable to me. So we were quite practical about it. What are we going to share? What are we not? And then we can flex as we go. If Grant's really busy or I'm really busy, we can kind of dip in and out. So, but it works so well for me. I've really enjoyed it, much more than being a chair on my own, I have to say.
I'm glad to hear that. And Grant, if Julie mentioned that you two share the meetings alternating. So if Julie's chairing, what are you doing and thinking at the back of the room or elsewhere at the front of the room? And similarly, if you're chairing, what are you looking for from Julie as well?
That's a great question. It really is, because you can collaborate even if you're not. You can play a role if you're not in the chair seat, but it's a careful role. So I think you observe. So one of the things that we do is we feed back to each other about how things went. We observe the meeting from a different perspective. When somebody's really sort of in it, it's nice for the other person to be sitting slightly outside of that, watching, observing, seeing the dynamics. What I really like about alternating the meetings is that you immerse yourself in the meeting that you're chairing, in the prep and the planning, and you can ask somebody to play a particular role. You can ask your co-chair to play a role at times if you need that, because you're both aligned to the agendas that are there, and the things that are important. So sometimes the prompting, or that question that you might have missed, or the covers that area off, it's belt and braces, isn't it? It gives you that additional security and support to ensure that you cover what you need to cover, and that you're not missing the dynamics in the room as well. I think we help each other out if we see that maybe we're not being as inclusive as we want, and somebody might not be contributing and might wish to. So it's all of the observational dynamics and support for the agenda, I would say, is the role that you can play. So you are playing a sort of chair role, but you're not. And the thing I found most challenging is learning when and when not to say something and get involved. And you do that from both seats. When you're in the chair, that's the hardest learning for me. Just to not say, not lead, not influence, because of the role that you've had. That's one of the real learnings I've had from Julie. But actually, when you're around the table too, people still see you as that chair, and you need to be careful that you don't need to. So, so that's part of the role that you play. I think that covers most of that. I mean, just one of the things that Julie mentioned that I wanted to just reflect on with the group here is that Julie mentioned it's helpful that I've been there. I've got some history with the organisation, and I think for co-chairing, it's really helpful if two people don't come in fresh. It can be good that you recruit a chair from outside, but co-chairing is a brilliant way of succession planning internally, even if you don't have somebody that's ready. And I think that's what we're a living example of at Getting on Board. And of course, you've referenced the great dynamics of more people involved. So one of the things you said at the beginning, Dan, and I'm going slightly off brief, but I'll stop in a moment. One of the things you said at the beginning is too many cooks. I wanted to react to that straight away, because actually I think, the more heads, the better, actually, if you've got the right behaviours.
Yeah, could I just say, I definitely would agree that it helped that I'd been a trustee for many years. Jo came in, as Julie did, completely new as a trustee and joined as a co-chair. And I think if you had two people doing that, I agree with you, Grant, it would be much, much harder to not just settle, but to actually be very effective.
Yeah.
Amanda, when you said that your organisation asked you to be chair and you approached a friend to ask you to join as a co-chair, how did that go down with your colleagues? Was there and obviously Amanda's going to share as much as she feels comfortable with, but were there things that perhaps you hadn't thought of that people said, oh, how's this going to work? Or obviously a bit of a change of culture. How did that go down?
Yeah, to be fair, we have in the last 5 years, we've actually become quite a small board. And I think when I joined, they were trying to think about succession planning, but because COVID hit, it didn't quite work in the way they had planned. And so literally we only had 4 active trustees at the time, and 2 that were sort of wanting to start leaving. And so we had to think really carefully about that. And I think that's a great question, Dan, because initially they weren't quite sure why I was proposing a co-chair. But I think also, interestingly, because the previous chair had been there a long time, and you can get very set, organizations can get very set in their ways of operating and being. And I think I was very fortunate because my fellow trustees, we all got on very well, and I was able to propose it in a way that, you know, having a new CEO come on board was actually going to be an opportunity for us to change the way we were working, the way we were focused, how we were running things. So, you know, all of that together, it was quite a big amount to take on, and a good deal to change. But I think I agree with Grant, you know, more people who can work together collaboratively can make a bigger difference, you know. So
Indeed.
you know, I could have had a lot more opposition to it, but I think also because Joanna has been an investor in the Hunger Project for many, many years, it's not a new organization to her. She's very passionate about our work, and she's supported us since she was in Australia. So it was more about, she'd never been a trustee, she didn't understand the role, she didn't really understand what she was letting herself in for. So it was more about making sure we were all confident it was the right thing.
Amazing. Julia, I'm going to come back to you. And actually, I was going to ask this question, but it's echoed as well by the question that Gainer's put in the chat. So I'm going to combine them both together. Gainer says, how do the 2 co-chairs approach relationships with senior staff, ensuring there's clarity around decision making, by whom and when? And I think actually we could widen that question to all decision making. And my question was going to be around sort of how to ensure you're not doubling up. Are you clear on what needs 1 signature and what needs 2? Sure, they're probably not signatures, but thumbs up on WhatsApp or however you operate in terms of sort of delegated authority and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think we try to keep things simple because I think clarity is important in all forms of work and life, and even more so where you've got a co-chairing relationship. So for us, there are decisions that Penny makes and there are decisions that the board makes. It's that simple. We happen to chair the board, but we prefer collective decision making and approval for things. And if we need to make a decision offline, then at the board meeting, we say, can we have a delegated authority for the chair to agree this with Penny, or a subset of trustees to sign this off, or bring back a recommendation? So I think it's just about keeping it really clear. And if Penny needs a signature and both of us are busy, one of us will get to it quicker than the other. So it doesn't matter as long as if it's that literal signing of things. But decision making clarity, I think, is super important. What's the remit of the people who are working in the organisation in an executive capacity, as you'd say, in a larger organisation, but I appreciate that's probably not the right language for smaller charities. And what's the preserve of the board? And actually, there should be very little that chairs are making decisions about on their own. It's not good governance, really, to not be getting the input from the board.
Great, thank you. Penny, I'm going to bring you in, if I may. I warned you I might do this, just to give. I'm sure you're going to say lots of lovely things. But as a chief exec that works with a pair of co-chairs, have you got insights, things that people might want to be thinking about if they're going to be people on this call that, in fact, there are people in the chat who are thinking of moving towards a co-chair model?
Yeah, I mean, I found it really positive. You know, I guess I had some trepidation about it, although Grant was already on our board, so he was a positive and known quantity. But whereas Julie, I didn't know at all. I think it really has been 2 for the price of 1. We have clarity about who does what. I know who to go to. I think there's nothing worse as a charity manager than having a chair that doesn't get back to you. So the idea of having 2 people that don't get back to you is not a great one. And I haven't found that at all. I don't think we've had a hiccup once where I should have asked both and I only asked one, or, you know, and I was waiting for somebody. That just hasn't happened. I think Grant and Julie are both very organised and very responsive people. And sometimes their response is, I'm not going to get to this yet. It's going to take, you know, it's going to be this day or this date until I get back to you on this. But at least then I know not, you know, I can park it. But yeah, it's been very positive, Dan, from my point of view. Amazing.
Thank you, Penny. I'm going to go to some questions in the chat. And the first one is from Mike from Involve Community Services. I'm going to read them out because if people are watching back on YouTube, they won't be able to see the chat. and others might appreciate that too. So Mike asks, I've been a chair this time for 12 months and have been now thinking of suggesting a small charity with income of 80k. Now also look for a vice chair to help me improve governance. Maybe we should be looking at co-chairs instead. Can you convince me that one is better than the other? And just before I open up the panelists, I'm assuming at AOC we're quite clear that actually a vice chair should be a role in its own right, rather than someone who is waiting in the wings for the chair to be ill for one meeting. And that's I could talk for hours on this, I won't, but for all the sort of sounding board reasons that Julie mentioned earlier and sort of divide some of the role up, all that sort of thing. So I'm assuming we'll talk about a sort of separate role rather than an understudy chair, if you like. Grant, shall I come to you first? Co-chairs over chair and a vice chair, any thoughts?
It depends. It depends on the person. It depends on what they want, what the charity needs. At that time, it depends on the chair and how they feel about sharing the role or having support. It depends on the sorts of things they want support with, you know. So if you're a chair that's struggling to support the CEO, do every meeting, then you probably want a co-chair, don't you? If there's somebody available. But actually, if it's a range of things that support you in your role and you're great at the meetings, you love it, you've got the time for that, then it might be a vice chair. So I'm putting it very simply that it really depends on the people and the personalities, actually, and where people are at in their experience, where the charity's at in its needs. So it's a whole range of factors involved. What I would say is that the chair role is particularly onerous. If you want to do it well, it's becoming more onerous with standards and governance going up, etc. And you need a co-chair or a vice chair. To do a chair role without either, I would be frightened. I just don't think I could do it well. So either or, both would be great.
And we do sometimes hear of both. I think I once heard of co-chairs and co-vice chairs, I think, which is effectively a leadership team of trustees. But I'm delighted that we've got a good influx of questions in the chat, so probably not going to have time for everyone to answer everything. But Julie or Amanda, I don't know whether you wanted to pitch in on that or whether we should go to another.
I'd like to, if that's all right, Dan, because I've been a vice chair and a chair before, and I've been a chair for large organisations that demand 3 days a week. If you'd asked me that question before I'd been a co-chair, I'd have given exactly the answer that Grant has. And I completely agree with all the points he's made about experience. But all too often, I think what you said when you framed the question, vice chair roles are really unclear. And it's unclear about, well, when does the vice chair get involved or not? And I've had that experience as a vice chair where I'm not in the loop for everything because I don't need to be, but then it's really hard to be a good vice chair. So when I look at it through the lens now of having been a co-chair, I think, well, why not just have co-chairs? Why have a vice chair? So my personal experience, I've preferred being a co-chair to being a vice chair. But I think it comes back to your point about being really clear about that role being well defined and coming back to that clarity of who's got the ball for what.
Thanks, that's really helpful. Amanda, can I pose a different question to you? Is that okay? We've had one that's come through privately on the chat. So it says, does having two chairs impact the board dynamic and relationship with other trustees? Could it skew the balance away from trustees? And I was about to say, especially on a smaller board, which of course includes yours.
Yeah, and I would say it's the opposite, actually. I think in my experience, it opens up the discussion, it opens up the ability to see things with different view lenses on, and with the trustees we've got, as Grant had mentioned about having what relationships you've got with people. I do have the role of keeping the team together, leading it generally on a day-to-day, week-to-week level. But I think Joanna comes in with some really insightful interjects, and I think that the rest of the board really appreciate that and being able to be more open or discuss this at different levels. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. And Grant or Julie, anything to add?
Grant's got his thinking face on.
No,
this is what you get when you co-chair, by the way. You start to be able to read your co-chair's face.
I think it adds value to the dynamics, because I think if you've got a diverse board, then people will naturally potentially gravitate to one personality or another. and will feel more comfortable with one personality or another, which means if you only have one personality and somebody's not comfortable, where do they go? So there's a benefit there. And I think the other thing is around some of the things I don't like about board dynamics is ego. And I think when you've got co-chairs, you're less inclined to have an egotistical single chair, if that makes sense. So I like the dynamics that arise from co-chairing.
Great, thanks. Another question has just come in privately, which I'm going to slightly paraphrase just to help protect the anonymity of the person who sent it in. But it's basically asking around governance protocols for the appointment of co-chairs and whether either of the organisations represented here had to sort of do any constitutional changes, or whether you've experienced sort of governance barriers, I suppose, to this new solution. It sounds like it's going to work quite well. This person say they're worried that if they propose co-chairing, it would need to go through the current governance protocols that might not lend themselves so well at the moment.
We definitely updated our articles of association, Dan, because it says chair right the way through it. So we had to change it to chair or co-chairs. And so there's been some administrative bits and pieces to make sure that that's compliant. But I don't think there's been anything in our governance arrangements per se that prevented this from happening. And obviously I was new to the charity, so Grant and Penny can probably speak better to where the proposal came from and whether there were any barriers at the start of the recruitment process. But other than making sure we've got, you know, our admin tidied up, I haven't experienced any governance challenges.
Amanda, anything from your
Yeah, no, not as far as exactly as Julie said. It, you know, there shouldn't be any really in my book, because you're still fulfilling the full role. And I think the most important thing is that both individuals are aware of the roles and responsibilities of being a chair. And as long as that is the case, there shouldn't be any issues.
Great, thank you. And Grant, also in the chat, I missed one earlier, which was a clarification question to what you were saying earlier about you and Julie alternating the meetings that you chair. And Ambrine's asked whether you both sit in on the planning meetings when one of you is chairing a meeting, or whether it's just the person that's sort of taking the lead on that meeting.
It's just the person that's taking the lead on that meeting, isn't it? Although I think early on I might have sat in on one of Julie's with Penny, just to sort of see how it all works. And one of the things I learned from Julie was how detailed her planning was, you know, behind every element of that meeting. And yeah, that was really good. So I don't feel like we need to now. I feel like we share that really well. We've got I used Julie's template that she shared from her first meeting. And that was really helpful. So no, you don't need to duplicate. This is the benefit, isn't it? That you can share the resource and, you know, manage your time. So no, I mean, just on the governance thing, there are some quirks that Penny could probably describe, and it's not worth much time, but you know, the Charity Commission will only allow one person to sign the accounts and stuff like that. So, you know, as long as the other one doesn't feel upset that their name's not on it, you know.
I'm really delighted you do all the signing, Grant. Honestly, it's really not a problem.
Yes, I think Jo would say the same. She's very happy for me to do it all.
On the meeting planning point that Grant made, we do shape the agendas together, though. So in terms of shaping the cycle of governance and what topics we need to cover, we do that together with Penny. But once we've all agreed the agenda, he's quite right. We get involved in our own detailed planning, and we either do it ourselves and come back to Penny, or we do it with Penny.
Great.
Well, actually, that's a good point. I prefer to do it with Penny. You might do it more on your own and then come back to Penny. So, Penny, we might have different ways of doing it now that we're evolving and finding our own styles. But yeah.
Good luck. Good luck. I'm sure you've got a great way of doing it. Was there anything that surprised any of you about co-chairing, good or bad? And have you found any drawbacks along the way that you weren't quite anticipating? I'm going to throw that open to whoever wants to come in.
So I'll do you know, everybody has their own imposter syndrome. I've had times since I've been co-chairing for getting on board where I've been busier than I should have been. And Grant stepped into the breach and I feel guilty. That's all on me. Grant doesn't make me feel guilty, neither does Penny, because you know that over the course of a tenure, it will all even out. So there's something about, I think if you're going to embrace being a co-chair and that practicality is important to you, you have to be able to let go without feeling bad about it. So that's been interesting. I've really enjoyed being in the board meetings as a co-chair, not chairing the meeting. And I quite deliberately approach the meetings in the way that Grant just talked about. I do very detailed prep when I'm chairing a meeting, but I don't. I read the papers like I'm a trustee and I don't have my chair's hat on. And I've really enjoyed being able to switch between the two. And I've got more out of being part of the board team, I think, as a result of that. And I hadn't thought that would matter or be as significant as it has been.
I think it's really important to remember that actually co-chairs are still full trustees in their own right. I was speaking to someone earlier about the difference between a sort of job share in the traditional sense of you're in charge Monday morning to Wednesday lunchtime and I'll be in charge Wednesday lunchtime to Friday. Actually, this is more of a sort of role split of we're both there all the time, but we're going to share some of the leadership responsibilities. And I think the differences between them are quite nuanced, but really important. And I think it's good that you can sort of enjoy a meeting on the second row back of the stalls, if you like, and sort of have that more participatory experience as well as worrying about the next agenda item. Amanda or Grant, have you got anything on?
I would agree with that, because what we found was we did alternate at the beginning for about 3 meetings, and then actually you realise who is actually more effective and able to do it. So we've just made that decision. So it makes it flexible. You know, I just think that flexibility is really key. And I think, like Julie, I really enjoyed being able to, you know, let Jo chair, and I just suggested she chair all the meetings. And I really find it easy to then reflect on what's been happening, because I'm involved probably a bit more on the detail side, to be able to sit back and remember and think, actually, we really need to fine tune that or whatever.
Indeed. And one person asked, oh, sorry, Grant, go on.
I was going to say, I think that's a really good point. You know, again, it's about understanding the motivation of your chairs. You know, I'm motivated to want to learn how to chair really well, so I wouldn't want to give up the chairing of the meeting. But I just wanted to add one thing, Dan, before we move on. It's just something Julie said. She's feeling guilty that I've done more. I'm sitting here thinking, actually, you've done some of the real heavy lifting on the governance and the changes that we've need to make that I just wouldn't be qualified for and probably wouldn't want to do. And it was her experience and expertise that allowed us to achieve that in a way that makes me really grateful and feels like I learned a lot. So I do find it interesting that you feel that I might have done more when I don't see it that way at all. You know, you've certainly done the things that I wouldn't want to do, and I've done the things that I feel that I do and can. So we have different skills. So the point here is we have different skill sets, different sets of experiences, and that together combined is really powerful. It's definitely not you do half the week and I do half the week and we're the same sorts of people. It's definitely not that.
Yeah,
I like the word gratitude there, Grant. I'm very grateful for you as a co-chair too. It makes such a difference. Sorry, Amanda.
No, it's fine. I just wanted to add, you were asking about challenges, and I think there are many challenges because, as Julie said, you know, there are times when you're not as available as the other person. But I look at that in a positive way, because if you're doing that on your own, it would be super difficult to keep on top of everything. And I think certainly from our experience, I know Joanna's been really grateful when she's been full on at work to offload on me and let me take the charge. And same when I've been abroad, because both my children live abroad. You know, I've been able to text her or call her up and say, I really need you to have this discussion. And that makes such a big difference, because you know you're being, as long as you are totally aligned with the person, you know that you're going to have that same effectiveness, either whoever does it.
One person said in the chat that they have a co-chair arrangement, which is to ensure chairs are representative of the membership. How do panel members, writes this person, avoid embedding a particular perspective or racial bias in their chairing?
I'd start by saying I think that's about the values of the organisation. And certainly, and you would expect us to say this, wouldn't you? Getting on board, inclusivity is at the heart of what we do. So we have a very diverse board. I was delighted with our diversity audit we did recently. You know, we are well above average for representation across typically underrepresented groups. But for me, it's as important that we have cognitive and experiential diversity as well as the protected characteristics, and that we all agree to work in a way which is for the good of the organisation that we are there to serve. And we have spent a lot of time as a new board team, because I joined, but other trustees have also joined and left, being really clear about what our values are, what we want from the board. Grant had given me some context for a style that we'd had that was right for the time, but we probably needed something different. And we've been very purposeful about how we've set the tone at meetings. So I don't think it's just about the representation in the co-chairs, although I recognise the importance of the point in the question. I think actually it's broader than that. It's about the inclusivity and the approach that the whole board takes, not just from a co-chair perspective.
Yeah,
Thanks,
totally
Julie.
agree with that.
I'd like to add, Dan, I think when it comes to representation, from the membership of an organisation or constituents, you will always meet challenges, won't you, for finding that diversity. And it's a problem, I think, that needs to be carefully managed with co-chairs. If you've got people that have to be in representative positions, then are you going to get the dynamics right to make the partnership work? That would be the comment that comes to mind for me. And should you have representation in other roles, and not the co-chair role would be a challenge I would make.
Yeah, great point. I think that's really important, isn't it? And we could probably do a whole other 3-hour webinar about, about some of these things. And indeed, Getting on Board have amazing webinars all through the year on increasing trustee diversity and various other things. So I will let Penny signpost some of them at the end. One person's asked about if they wanted to approach the board with the idea of co-chairs. They say, ask them or tell them. I don't know whether this is a sort of tell them this is how one is standing. But Grant, Manda, or Julie, if you've got experience from elsewhere, how did that sort of go when you were moving from trustee to co-chair? I'm
going to jump in just because of my recruitment hat. I think that every role should be offered as either chair or co-chair or some other derivative, because it's about the people. And you don't know who's going to come through. You massively restrict the field if you're asking one person to do it. So it shouldn't be an argument that you have to make. It should be a recommendation at the start that you open it up to, different working arrangements. That's my first response.
Great response. Well, I'm involved with one organisation at the moment where we've got one person in an interim officer role, and our plan is actually to go out to recruitment and say if there's someone that wants to do it completely themselves, then that's absolutely fine, and they can apply on that basis, and the interim person's up for laying it down. But also, if they'd like to apply with the possibility of taking it on as a split or a share, then that's, we're open to that too. And as you say, Grant, I think advertising it with as many different angles and sort of entry ideas, if you like, can only increase the number of people that might get
there is a question that comes out of that, which is, how do you best assess? So if you're going to recruit co-chairs potentially, or people put themselves forward for that, do you see them together or individually? And again, this is a whole nother webinar in its own right. But I think it needs to be individually to start with, and then you come together, and that's the way things went here. I mean, we went through an open process here. I've never asked Penny about the competition and how stiff it was or not. And I just don't know how many we were competing against, but we interviewed alone. People got a sense of who we were. The panel got a sense of who we were individually and what we could offer together. And I think that's really important. And I think that organisations can make recommendations to say, yeah, we've advertised a chair role, but we've seen 2 great people. I wonder if, and when we think the dynamics might work, would you consider doing it together? Yeah.
And I'd add to that, Grant, and Dan's point you made about having a member of staff that you're going out to advert for. What makes me curious is why, when we look at board roles, whether it's a trusteeship or a non-executive role, we treat them any differently to any other member of an organisation, and wonder. We've been doing job sharing for years in all levels of an organisation. So what's the challenge? What makes it so hard to go, well, clearly there's a value because we can attract a wider diversity, all the things that you'd make the case for if you were saying, I'd like to make a member of the staff team a job share. What stops you? Trustees have a different set of accountabilities, but they're a member of the organisational team, right? Same rules apply.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right, and we've got to start sort of accepting these options as part of the norm rather than sort of something over on the side to get some more people involved in the sector, is my objective opinion. Manda, can you tell us about some opportunities that you might have had that you don't think you would have had the time for or the whatever for if you were a chair rather than a co-chair? So, and you said that you want to sort of make that change from being chair.
It's a really good question, and I think it's a hard one to answer. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure that any of the opportunities, it's difficult to differentiate whether that would have happened if I'd been a chair or a co-chair. I think all I can say is that, because we're both quite different in our styles and our approaches, and we have very different networks, there's been a great opportunity to go out to, more diverse, more open chats with people. I have a much more corporate experience, and Joe has a very entrepreneurial experience, which makes us very different anyway. So that means that when we are trying to talk to, whether it's to the CEO or whether it's to our staff, or whether it's about fundraising or whether it's about, future strategy, we're coming at it as very different perspectives. And I think that's a really helpful, and I think many times there's been opportunities for me to go to talk at corporates, and equally she's had opportunities to go to talk at entrepreneurial events, whether it's, we recently went to Virgin Unite, and I would never have got that opportunity if she hadn't asked me, but she's not as networky and as confident as me, so she's like, right, I'm taking you along because it's just going to be easier if you start doing the chat. So there is a definite need. I think you're going back to people asking about, should they ask for a co-chair, should they ask for a vice chair? I think it's really important to get the clarity of how it's going to look, what's the future hold, what's the benefits, and what are the pros and cons. It's like anything in life. There are definitely opportunities, both good and bad. And I think Grant made a really important comment about ego coming into it. And if you get a very imbalanced co-chair relationship, that can be just as damaging as a bad chair CEO relationship, so all of these things are brilliant if they work well.
Indeed. Grant, anything to add?
I just think that's a really good point. I think we've talked about what's gone well and what's going well and how it can work well, but I think there are more risks, and I think there needs to be real attention paid to the people, the personalities, the dynamics between the people, and the recruitment and assessment process, and maybe even a trial period. I don't know. I think that's why it's working for us with one in the organisation who kind of knew what would work. And back to my reservation about two co-chairs coming in from outside, but I wouldn't let that prevent it. I just think there's an appreciation of more risk that needs to be managed. So good point, good balancing point there, Amanda, I think.
And I think you both said. Sorry, go on, Amanda.
No, I mean it in a good way. So I don't mean it in a negative way, but I think it's important to assess those risks.
Yeah.
I think there's something about starting with.
It's hard to change that, right?
Indeed. Yeah, that's a good for Julie.
If you start with the end in mind, what's the outcome you're looking to achieve? What is it that you want to get out of having a co-chair? And if you're really clear about that outcome, then you'll be clear about the steps you need to take to get that, but also the risks you might encounter along the way. So personally, I would find it really hard to have been a co-chair if I didn't know the other co-chair. I found it really beneficial that Grant was already in the organisation, but I think that's probably less important to me than the fact that I knew Grant and we had shared values and we had, like a Venn diagram, things that were complementary, but things that were very different and diverse about both of us. And so, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about treating it like any other role. To Grant's point, if you've got two people coming in brand new to an organisation, have a probation period. Somebody put in the chat, my co-chair's going on maternity leave. Have some maternity cover. Just treat it the same way as any other role that you would do in order to be able to manage those risks. But if you're really clear about the outcomes you're looking to get and the benefits, then I think it helps you be alive to those risks.
Thanks,
I
Julie.
have
And you,
one question.
sorry, Amanda, go on.
I've not had experience as a vice chair. I've not been in an organisation where they've had a vice chair, and I'm just wondering whether, if it's someone totally new, whether that would be an opportunity to bring them on as a vice chair, to see if it's something that would work well together, because you can then actually have a trial period of what it involves, what it entails, and whether you work well together. And that I'm just wondering whether, if it was big enough as a board, whether you could trial that. I don't know what Julie thinks with her experience.
My first chair's role was exactly that, Amanda. So I joined as a chair-elect. It was in an educational sector, so there was an annual cycle to that. So it was like be the chair-elect for a year, understand the organisational rhythm for a year, get to know it, and then step into the chair's role. So it's the same principle, I think. I think it's a great idea.
And some organisations do it the other way around as well, in that the outgoing chair is then the vice chair for a year. So there's a sort of lengthy handover / I'm here if you'd like some support, sounding board sort of stuff. Some organisations have a SID, a senior independent director, and that might be the vice chair or might be someone else, but that's someone to go to if you want to say something anonymously to the chair, or you've got concerns about the chair, or that sort of thing. So there's so many different models, and I think Grant said earlier, it's about finding the right one for the organisation. You know, what works within people's capacity, within the sort of framework, what's allowed in your governing document. I have to get that in somewhere in the hour, and various other things. So, but there are loads of different ways of sort of running it, and I think it's about finding the one that works for the organisation, really. Grant, I'm going to come to you and just ask Peter's question, which slipped through the net. So sorry, Peter. Peter asked, my co-chair is going on maternity leave, as Julie mentioned. So Peter's going to be sole chair for the year. Any tips? Remembering, presumably, that the co-chair will still have their sort of provisional name above the door, in terms of they'll still be a trustee for that year as well.
Well, not been in that situation. Julie might be better to answer that, but I would personally see that as a really nice opportunity to do it myself for a year and see how it goes. So I wouldn't do anything radical in terms of thinking maybe I need somebody else to step in. However, if there was somebody chomping at the bit on the board that could have an opportunity to come and co-chair with me, why not take that opportunity or give them that opportunity? So I think there's situations that can be looked at as opportunities, and that's one. For both the co-chair to be sole chair or somebody else to join as co-chair. That's what comes to mind for me.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think there's something here, isn't there, about being mindful about the motivation of all of your board members. So why are they trustees? So they'll, of course, be committed to the organisation that they're there to serve. But we've got members of our board who are keen to chair working groups or want to grow in their own trustee journey. And that's a great opportunity, isn't it? Somebody who might not put their hat in the ring to be a co-chair, and they might not feel that they're ready yet. But you say, actually, we know that this is where you want to go in your journey in trusteeship. So why don't you do that for a year, and we can help you and you can get the experience and see if it's for you. It's a great opportunity. I'm with Grant, but I'm always glass half full. So.
Amanda, anything to add?
Yeah, no, I just think for us, I mean, we're already talking about succession planning because we are a small board and we've added 2 new trustees this last 6 months. And I think for me, having seen how it panned out when I first joined, I think it's really critical that, you know, you do think about succession planning for all areas, including new trustees, diversity, including age and background and everything. And actually that enables people, as Julie says, to grow through the organisation and feel confident with stepping up to take on a role such as the trustee or the treasurer or the co-chair role or the chair role, in fact.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important, and there's so much to be learned from each other as well, aren't there, in a co-chairing relationship. We're not quite there yet, you'll be pleased to know, but I did promise Penny I'd leave a couple of minutes, so I'm going to move to my sort of group of closing questions, which will hopefully sort of round this conversation off quite nicely. And the first one's hopefully a bit easier, but it's basically, what would you say to anyone considering co-chairs? And Grant, I'm going to start with you.
I'd say you get the opportunity to chair with a comfort blanket. You have somebody next to you. You're not going to fail on your own. People coming to chairing for the first time, it's a really lovely way for me. This is my experience. That's why I'm talking from this point of view. But it was my opportunity, and to do it with somebody I knew I could do it with and who I could learn from. So to be thrust in, and I did apply for a chair role with another organisation externally that I didn't know and didn't get. And it was probably right, because I wasn't ready and I didn't know I wasn't ready. So you've got all of that going on, haven't you? So for me, I think it's a great opportunity for people. That's what I would say. I'll let others chip in.
Thanks, Grant. And by the way, just before I go to Julie and Amanda, I should have said earlier, there's some cracking stuff in the chat. I'm sorry I haven't been able to acknowledge all of the comments as well as the questions. But as you're going through, if you watch the recording back, then do have a look at some of the comments. There's some stuff about advocacy and the way that people need to be thinking and moving, which I think is really good. So commend all that to you. Sorry I haven't been able to pick it all out. Manda, what would you say to people who are thinking about considering having co-chairs on their board?
I think it can work brilliantly. I think it can be really, really uplifting. I think it actually can really benefit a charity. I'm always conscious of the risks and who they are, and whether they know each other, whether they don't. I noticed on the chat someone said they're co-chairs and they didn't know each other, didn't know the charity, and obviously it worked. So there's no rights or wrongs. I think the two people that are taking it on have to be confident and in their comfort zone to be able to do it.
Great, thank you. And Julie?
Why, what and how. Be clear about why you want to do it, be clear about what you need to do to make it work, and be clear about how you are going to continually evaluate that it is working.
Great advice, thank you. And thank you for that. A group of three is always a good thing. Which
I live my life by
nicely,
groups of three.
segues nicely onto my last question. And in hindsight, I should have asked this at the end of every chairing webinar I've ever done. But there'll be some people on this call that haven't been a chair, aren't chairs, are considering being a chair, whether or not that becomes a co-chair arrangement. So what I'm after are your 3 words that make a good chair. It's definitely, I'll allow hyphens, but I'm not allowing more than 3. We can do this quickly and then I'm going to hand back to Penny. Grant, I'm going to start with you.
Can I go last? Sorry, I'm still thinking.
Okay.
Can we do one each?
Julie, are you ready?
3 words that make a good co-chair. Listening, empathy, humility.
Listening, empathy, humility. Thank you. Manda, are you ready to come to you?
Really, I'm just going to jump. I mean, empathy was top of my list. Trust.
Oh, great word.
Was a big one. And
how did I miss that?
Collaboration.
Great. Thank you. And Grant?
Committed, inclusive, and I'll say they have to have integrity.
Brilliant. Empathy, listening, humility, trust, collaborative, committed, inclusive, and integrity. Easy. Thank you so much to our wonderful panelists. It's been a great discussion. I've really enjoyed it. We could have gone on for hours. I promised Penny 2 minutes at the end, so I'm going to stop there, but I've really enjoyed that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Dan, Grant, Julie, and Manda. That was such a fascinating conversation. And thank you to everybody who contributed in the chat with questions and comments, which made it all the richer. I've put the evaluation form in the chat. I'd be really grateful if you told us what you thought of this session. You'll also find a space in that form to give us ideas for other sessions. That is where all of these sessions come from. They come, we crowdsource them basically. So if you've got ideas of other things you'd like to talk about, or maybe you'd like to talk about this topic again, then do tell us in the form. A big thank you again to Charisma's Starfish, TPP, Peridot and Diversifying Group who sponsored this session. That's why it's free of charge, which is very important to us because it helps us make these sessions accessible. And then just a couple of plugs for other getting on board work. So Dan mentioned our wonderful webinars. Thank you, Dan. So this is part of the Trustee Learning Programme, which is a series of free webinars for and about trustees. The link is in the chat. It'll also be in your follow-up email. Please check it out and come along to any other that you fancy. You'll also find on Getting On Board's website lots of free guides to becoming trustees and recruiting trustees. And in less than 4 weeks' time, it's our Festival of Trusteeship, which is the largest gathering in the UK of trustees. We had 2,500 people last year. We think we might beat that this year. I don't know. So do look up the Festival of Trusteeship, and we'll put that in the links as well in the follow-up email. Dan, I'm just going to pass back to you so that you can do some Association of Chairs related plugs.
Well, we love to hear from anyone in a chairing role in the sector. Chairs, vice chairs, co-chairs, committee chairs, chairs elect. You're all welcome to join us as members. We've got some great resources and events as well, and a peer network of 1,000 people that you'd be joining. We've got monthly peer sessions to come and share joys and challenges, I often say. So if you're interested in any of that, do get in touch with me, or there'll be links in the follow-up email as well. You can sign up to our newsletter, and there's a couple of guides you can download for free. So come and have a look. But thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Have
Thanks
a good
for
night.
coming.
Cheers.
Thank you. Thank you very much.